how to address a counterargument in your argumentative synthesis essay. We will talk about what is involved in a counterargument, where it's located, what kind of structure you should be using. So first, it's important to note that persuasive writing requires the use of counterargument. So what is counterargument? Well, the counterargument is, these are the ideas that oppose your thesis, or an idea that opposes your thesis, or at least part of your thesis. When you're trying to persuade someone to think something, or believe something, or even do something, you have to be able to anticipate how somebody's going to disagree with you. So when you find research that goes against your own argument, don't ignore it. That's pure gold. That is exactly what you want to use for the counter-argument. The counter-argument must be presented fairly and without bias. Don't twist the words of those that you don't agree with. That's an unfair way of representing yourself and representing the truth. So, why do you need the counter-argument? First of all, it demonstrates that you're unbiased and that you're well-read on your subject. You know what you're talking about because you know how people disagree with you. You're not blind to the fact that some people disagree with you. Your addressing the counter-argument also strengthens your position, makes you seem more established, more rooted. You must anticipate how others might disagree with you when you're trying to persuade. To fail to do so is to lose your audience. There are two basic ways to debunk a counter-argument. One is the refutation. This is when you outright refute the opposition. You state that the opposition is just flat wrong. You need to provide evidence of their position so that we know, your readers, that you are being unbiased, that you are fairly representing them. And then you need to provide evidence to the contrary, evidence that supports your point of view. So you need evidence on both sides, evidence of their position, but evidence that shows yours is stronger. The second option is to concede. Now, the concession isn't just saying, you know what, they're right. Otherwise, why are you even writing your paper? To concede is to admit that the opposition is partially correct, that maybe they have some good ideas, or that something they're saying is factually based. But you need to qualify their position. What is it that's gone wrong here? Maybe the opposition is just in the wrong context. Maybe what they have to say doesn't really work when you consider the real world. Or maybe they've taken the facts, but they have used them to make a point that really cannot be substantiated. So the concession is a second opportunity to basically say, you know, they have a point, but here's what they have not considered. This is why their boat doesn't float, basically. Provide evidence of their position, and then provide evidence of your position. Your evidence, the evidence that supports your position, needs to demonstrate how their perfectly valid information does not really apply or it misses the point. Most of the time, students go with the refutation instead of the concession, but you can go either way. In terms of structuring the counter-argument, it's pretty basic. You need to begin, number one, state that the opposition exists. Right? This is going to be the claim in the paragraph, basically. 2, identify the message of the opposition fairly and without bias. What is the opposition actually saying? Number 3, provide evidence of the opposition, like a quote, that kind of thing, so that we know that you're not misrepresenting them. 4, explain and interpret that evidence fairly. And then, when we get to number 5, this is where we turn the corner. The first half of the counter-argument paragraph is presenting the opposition. The second half is where you challenge it. So item 5, refute or concede. Refute that opposition, make a statement that says, here's what they haven't considered, or here's why they're wrong. 6, provide evidence, your own quote, your own research that supports your refutation. 7, explain or interpret your evidence. And 8, wrap up the paragraph with a reconnection to the thesis. Altogether, the counter-argument paragraph, it's probably longer than most paragraphs. It could get up to 10, 11 sentences in length, potentially. It just depends on how you structure the paragraph in terms of sentence style. If you're using all simple sentences, it's going to be a lot more sentences than using a few complex sentences, which I recommend using. So here's a sample. I've taken the next two slides to give you an example of a counter-argument paragraph. The first half is on this page. This is where we present the opposition. The next half of the paragraph is on the next page, on the next slide. I'm numbering the sentences so that you can see what it is that's actually being said for each part. So you can refer back to the numbers on this slide and come back and identify them here. So we're going to be stating the opposition, identifying the message, providing evidence, and then interpreting that evidence. Number one, some researchers oppose the legalization of marijuana for fear of increased drug abuse. So this opposition stands against the idea of legalizing marijuana. This counter-argument paragraph comes from a theoretical essay that is pro-legalization. So number one, we present the opposition. Two, we need to characterize that, articulate it in an unbiased way, fairly. They say that legalization will only expand America's drug trade and multiply the number of drug users. Three, this is where we present evidence. Let's say we're going to be sharing from a source we have not yet used. Anytime you use a source for the first time, you have to introduce it. Carl Smith, in his article, Drugs Are a Drag, discusses the misfortune that is sure to befall America in the wake of marijuana legalization. We got the introduction out of the way. Let's go ahead and quote. He says, a carte blanche for marijuana users will likely produce a 40 to 60% increase in drug abuse of all kinds, not just marijuana. After we have presented the evidence, we need to go ahead and interpret it accurately, fairly. His statistics are based off projections from a 1990 study conducted in Portugal, which predicted a massive increase in drug activity. Now we're going to move on to 5 through 8. Refute, evidence, interpret, and wrap up. So number 5. Smith's conclusions, however, have not proven to be true, particularly in Portugal, where drug abuse has decreased by nearly 80% since legalizing all drugs used in 2010. According to Garcia, the legalization of drugs, and marijuana in particular, will, quote, result in such an abundance of business that illegal drug transactions will likely vanish within 2 years, unquote, because prices will be depressed as drugs become available. Not only does Garcia forecast the elimination of illegal drug sales, but he also anticipates massive taxable income benefiting social health care services such as Medicare and Medicaid. So we've presented our refutation, we've provided evidence, we've interpreted evidence, and then we end with number 8. This is where we reconnect with our thesis. If we're writing a paper that argues that legalizing marijuana will be good for the country, this is where we reinforce that. Although some may oppose legalizing marijuana due to unwarranted fears, choosing not to legalize may in fact have far more devastating effects on both our national health and our healthcare system. So finally, in terms of a location, where should we put the counterargument? So usually your counterargument opposes your whole thesis. Sometimes it'll oppose just one main point in your thesis. But let's assume for a moment that it opposes your entire thesis. If it does, then the counterargument should be located after your last main point, just before the conclusion. If your counterargument is opposing one of your main points only, then you need to put it directly after that main point. It doesn't make a lot of sense to argue something in main point 1 and then to share a counterargument for that idea, but wait 5 pages later to do so. Just sneak it in right after that main point before the next one. So you basically have 2 options for counterargument. The one that opposes your thesis. In this case, you'll have your introductory paragraph, a few paragraphs for main point 1, a few paragraphs for main point 2, a few paragraphs for main point 3, and then your counterargument, and then your conclusion. But if your counterargument opposes just one of the main points and not your whole thesis, let's say it opposes main point 2, for example, this might be the structure of your paper. Introduction, 1 paragraph, main point 1, a few paragraphs, main point 2, a few paragraphs, boom, counterargument, 1 paragraph, and then main point 3, a few paragraphs, and then your conclusion. So you need to choose one of these two depending on what counterargument material you're going to cover. And that's basically how you build a counterargument.